starting the live feed shortly. I believe he's just getting it going now. So we will be, Jeff, if you can just confirm whenever it's all ready.
Of course, just spinning up right now. We are now live.
Thank you.
Okay, members of council, the clerk advises me that we are close enough to 4:30 to start this special council meeting. So I will officially call it to order, and all of council is present for this special council meeting. The clerk and I, along with the CEO, had a brief discussion on the agenda. It's my intention, and again, as long as there's concurrence with the majority council, on dealing with the mask issue first, and then dealing with the recovery issue second, and the integrity report third. So on the assumption that that's okay with everybody, and the main reason for that is because we do have delegations. And talking about delegations, there are 2 written submissions. One of the listed delegations has withdrawn, but they still wish their written submission to stand. But we do have 2 listed delegations, and we'll be hearing from them very shortly. So with that, we're going to move forward. So is there any conflicts by any member of council at this point? Seeing none, we will proceed. And for everybody's information, Nina will be the director of traffic, as I refer to it. So she'll be calling people in and out as we go through the council agenda here today. And I might remind, especially the delegations, that we have a limit. Council set a limit of 5 minutes, and when we get to the 5 minutes, the clerk will advise me that the 5 minutes is up. And if they've not already wrapped up, I'll suggest wrapping it up at that point in time. So with that, Madam Clerk, is there anything further, any amendments, anything that we need to highlight at this point? Clerk advises me not. So with that, Nina, if you'd bring on the first delegation as listed as Laurie Dietrich and Deborah Boer. So with that,
Yes.
Nina?
Yes, I'm just going to promote them over to panelists, and they should be joining shortly. Okay, I see that they are now as part of the panelist list. Deborah, if you can hear us, you're just going to have to turn on your video and turn on your sound.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yeah, very good. So if you could
Okay.
just identify yourself, name, address for the record.
Absolutely. My name is Deborah Boer, and I live at 3123 Limestone Road in Campbellville. And obviously we come here to Milton to shop, so it concerns us very much. So I thought we were given 10 minutes, but if I only have 5, then I would like to get started on my main points. I'd like to discuss the most important issues that we have as a group are the side effects for public health risks associated with wearing masks. So according to the WHO, masks can provide a false sense of security and result in reduced infection control measures, including reduced hand washing, reduced social distancing, and other reductions in habits of personal hygiene. And according to the WHO, these measures are more important than wearing a mask. The WHO, the British Medical Journal, and other sources also state that self-contamination can occur if non-medical masks are not changed when wet or soiled. This can create favorable conditions for microorganisms to amplify. So now we have a scenario where someone is forced to wear something on their face that will trap the virus, create a humid habitat in which the virus can thrive, and will actually increase the chances of that person becoming infected with COVID. A BBC report has also reported that there are health issues with the mask. And the WHO has also found that masks can cause headaches, breathing, and difficulty breathing and skin conditions. So we at our group, we're asking what causes these headaches and skin conditions? And what are the long-term effects of breathing through a mask? My husband runs a manufacturing company in Milton. He was approached by the husbands of one of the heads of the Hamilton General Hospital. He was trying to see if my husband could find a supplier for N95 masks for the hospital workers, because his wife told him, and I quote, "The ones from China are making everybody cough." What are these masks made of? Have these masks been chemically treated? Have these masks been tested? Why do they cause headaches and skin conditions in some people? Why are they causing hospital workers to cough? Would this irritation to their respiratory system make them more susceptible to COVID-19 in the long run? These are some very serious questions with serious implications for public health. As a concerned parent, I urge you that if you don't question these things for yourself or for your neighbors, then question it for our children. In addition to these public health considerations that the WHO has backed up and it can be found on their website, there are also some moral considerations that we should take towards our fellow man. So I know this bylaw has been proposed by Di Lorenzo, and it would have exemptions for people with medical conditions or for whom the wearing of masks is not physically feasible. So not only is this bylaw redundant, because most of the people who can wear masks already do wear them voluntarily in indoor spaces, but this bylaw, regardless of these exemptions, does not take into consideration the extreme discrimination and verbal abuse that is faced by many of the people who do not wear masks. And this is all currently happening when masks are optional. Supporting this bylaw will encourage this already dreadful culture of shaming, discrimination, and verbal abuse. In Canada, we pride ourselves on being a country of tolerance and understanding. We respect one another's personal creed, and we do not isolate those who don't fit in. We understand that people are very, very scared, and it makes people feel safe when they're wearing a mask and when other people are wearing a mask. But we cannot let these impulses of fear and policies override people's liberties, dignity, the health, and the well-being of others. We at the Citizens Group opposed to mask mandates feel very strongly that mandating masks is unreasonable. It is irresponsible because we have knowledge of side effects of wearing the masks, which indicate a real threat to public health. And it is immoral because it supports the current climate of shaming, abuse, and discrimination, and further isolates mentally and physically impaired populations. There have been
Yes. Deborah, if I might, the clerk advised me that 5 minutes is up, so if you could wrap up, please.
Absolutely. There have been countless physically, mentally, and financially harmful measures put into place to slow the spread of this virus, a virus that is not going to disappear. Must we continue to feed into the fear, division, shame, and suffering? Please do not add to the damage that has already been done. We urge you to break this cycle by voting against this bylaw. I thank you very much, Mayor Krantz and councillors, for your time today.
Yeah, Deborah, if you would be so kind to just stand by, I'll determine in just a moment if there's any questions of you. But also I have listed Laurie Dietrich, and she's on that same delegation. So Is Lori with you, Deborah?
Yes, one moment. Lori?
Because she is listed and I don't want to overlook her.
Okay, one moment, please. Lori? They're wondering if you have anything to add.
Oh, I missed what has already been said. So
Mostly about health and discrimination.
yeah, those are the big things. Just that this can be choice.
No, okay, no.
Yeah.
Okay, no, she doesn't have anything to add. That's
Okay, well, that's great. I just didn't want to bypass her because you both were listed on the delegation list here. So
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
So just stand by, Lori, if you, or Deborah, if you would. I'll determine if there's any questions of any of my colleagues. Members of council, are there any questions of Deborah on her presentation? I'm not seeing any, Deborah. Thank you very much. And again, stand by after we hear from the next delegation. Council will be debating and hopefully a resolution of sorts will be coming forward. Thank you very much for your presentation. Nina, back over to you, please.
Yes, I will
For the next
promote.
delegation.
Absolutely. Your worship, I will promote Roy over shortly. Sorry, just bear with me 1 second. Roy, I believe if you unmute yourself, you should have the ability to speak now. Would you mind giving that a try? Sorry, just 1 second, Mayor.
Yeah, no rush, Nina.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you
Hello?
now. Yes. Hi, Roy.
Oh,
We can
perfect.
hear you.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, Roy, it's Gord Krantz here. And again, welcome to the special council meeting dealing with the mask issue. So, and again, as mentioned earlier on, you have 5 minutes there, and the clerk will advise me when the 5 minutes up, and then I'd ask you to wrap it up. So, Roy, if you'd be so kind to introduce yourself, name and address, and then proceed, please.
Sure, my name's Roy Piatila. I live at 1944 Thompson Road South. So I'm just south of town, just south of Britannia. So thank you, Mayor Krantz, councilors, for giving me the opportunity to address you today. Once again, my name is Roy Piatila. I'm a father of 3. Both my youngest child and my wife have asthma, and my middle child has a compromised immune system. My family is also looking after an elderly parent that we moved from a long care facility back in May. So please help us keep COVID away from our family, because it could have a devastating impact. Professionally, I'm a CFO at a global company that employs over 20,000 people. And since early April, I've been part of a North American COVID task force that includes members from all our facilities, which include Livermore, California, Gainesville, Florida, Mason, Ohio, New York City, Eatontown, New Jersey, Mexico City, Quebec City, and Mississauga. So starting in April, we met daily. We trimmed this back to 3 times a week in June, and we further reduced this to twice a week in July. By no means am I expert on this topic. However, I am well read on this topic, and I've been following it closely since January. We in Canada have been more fortunate than my colleagues south of us. In my opinion, this is due to leadership listening to health officials, early adoption of best practices, and citizens following those practices. As we learn more about the transmission of COVID-19, those best practices have changed. Therefore, if we want to continue our path, we must also change. Health officials globally support mask wearing. Numerous municipalities have taken matters into their own hands to pass temporary bylaws mandating the public to wear masks in indoor spaces. These regions include Toronto, Durham, Waterloo, Brampton, Mississauga as of this morning, Kingston, Windsor, Essex, Wellington, Dufferin, Guelph, Lennox and Addington County, Frontenac, Middlesex, London, and there's several more. So this list is growing by the day. So my question is, Is Milton different from these regions? Do we have a unique immunity in our area? Is the demographic so different from the rest of the regions that make us less susceptible? I'm guessing not. So some Miltonians have been or will be in a fight to save their life or the life of a loved one. It's the obligation of every citizen to do what they can to ensure the safety of all Miltonians and to ensure there's one less fight and one less death. To get through this pandemic the safest, we need to fight on a unified front. The new best practice is wearing masks indoors. So please have the courage to join our neighbors on a unified front and make this mandatory in Milton. I applaud those establishments that have taken a strong stand on safety. One prime example is Longo's. They have adopted a no mask, no service policy a couple months ago. So in closing, please help me in protecting my family. Please protect your family. And please protect all the people in Milton by making masks mandatory in the public spaces. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much, Roy. If you would just stay there for just a brief moment, I would see if there's any question of any of my colleagues of you with your presentation. Members of council, are there any questions of the presenter? I'm not seeing anyone, Roy, so thank you very much. And again, you probably heard me mention there before, I had two presentations there and we've heard both of them. Now, I have a resolution that I'm going to be reading out here and then we will be debating it. And then of course, hopefully there will be a resolution. So Roy, thank you very much. Members of council, if I might, the clerk and I have had some discussion on this, as you would suspect, over the last couple of days. And I know I have an amendment appropriately moved and seconded here. And I also know that I have an amendment as well. And because the one that I'm going to read out come in first, and this is where the clerk and I had talked about this, how we're going to deal with them. So that's what I'm suggesting, dealing with the one that come in. But just before that, and of course, I'd asked the clerk earlier on today, some of you have already probably seen some of the resolutions and some of the bylaws by the three other municipalities, Oakville, Burlington, Halton Hills. Some of them probably have passed some of those. Some of them are probably at this point proposing them, but I think we all are in receipt of them. And I know as recently this morning, I received the one from Oakville. And at least in my personal opinion, that's the best one out of the three so far. So I'm going to go on record right now on this is the one that I support unless somebody can convince me otherwise. But I think, and again, on reading the motion that I'm about to read, pretty well captures what Oakville is saying that I'm supportive of. And I usually avoid leading the debate, but I think this one's fairly important that you know where I come from. And again, there's 5 of us at the regional level. And really what this alludes to is that really where the decision should be made on behalf of all the 4 area municipalities. Now I have to share with my colleagues as well. Some of us were criticized on not involving our local councillors as well, and rightfully so, and I respect that, because local councillors should have a say and do have a say as much as us mayors do and the regional representatives as to what they think or don't think about this issue here. So full disclosure on my part as to where I'm coming from and some of the reasons why, I guess for the lack of a better word or phrase, that I insisted that we deal with this today. And it's a walk on. Of course, we did it according to the laws of the land on giving 48 hours notice to the public. And I should also make mention when we're off camera there is a demonstration that's going on out around the town hall here today dealing with the mask issue. So for those that maybe weren't aware of that, that is happening as you and I speak here today. So with that, I'm going to read out the resolution. And it's been moved by Councillor Cluett, second by Councillor Hamid. And be it resolved, whereas COVID-19 has been declared a global pandemic by the World Health Organization. And whereas COVID-19 is a dangerous communicable disease that is spread from person to person, primarily through droplets from an infected person. And whereas the Mayor of the Town of Milton, along with Milton Council, in conjunction with the Region of Halton, has declared a state of emergency, which is still in effect. And whereas the public health and safety of residents and visitors to the town is of the utmost importance during the COVID-19 pandemic. And whereas many municipalities have either strongly recommended or mandated the use of masks or face coverings in public enclosed places. And whereas Halton Region is the upper tier level of government responsible for public health in Milton. Therefore, be it resolved that Milton Council requests that the Halton Region at its next available meeting present to Council a draft bylaw for mandatory masks, ensuring consistency across all 4 municipalities in the region, and in keeping with the Regional Medical Officer of Health's recommendation for people to wear masks or face coverings to help control the spread of COVID-19. And further, the Town of Milton Council requests the Province of Ontario to reconsider its stance and enact legislation making mask and face coverings mandatory across the province of Ontario. So that's the resolution, members of council, that is before us now. And again, if necessary, I will get to the amendment that was suggested as well. But with that, Councillor Cluett being the mover and seconder, is there anything you want to highlight on your motion here? And then I'll go to Councillor Maid as seconder. Councillor Cluett.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, for actually getting this meeting put together. I know that there had been some talk over the weekend, making sure that a lot was happening over throughout the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area, and to get this meeting set up as quickly as we did. So thank you very much for that. One of the reasons why I wanted to get this motion forward is this is obviously a topic that's being discussed all over the province, all over the Southern Ontario, and some municipalities have gone ahead and passed local bylaws. What I was fearing was if each one of the local municipalities in Halton had passed their own particular bylaws, there would be some obvious differences between each one of them. And it really, it dawned upon me that obviously the Halton region is responsible for public health in Milton and all the other four municipalities here. And that's where this bylaw should be passed, is at the upper tier at Halton region, debated as such. We had an email earlier on this week from our Halton CAO, Jane McCaskill, basically essentially saying that one is being drafted for the July 15th meeting for debate and discussion by Halton region. That'll be made available, I believe, on Friday to regional councilors and to the public, which will give us a fair amount of time to review it, make any changes and such before a council decision is made. And what I wanted to do is to add, very similar to the town of Oakville, they had a very similar meeting last night where some delegations, as we have, stated their point. Local councillors, as well as the regional councillors, stated their points for the record, whether they were in support or not. And this meeting provides that opportunity for our local councillors as well to be part of the debate and to be involved if they so choose. But the resolution in Oakville, the clause for the one in Burlington and the clause in the one in Halton Hills all stated that Halton region should be the one to pass a uniform bylaw, so there are no questions for people who travel throughout the region. If you live in Milton and work in Oakville, or if you're traveling to Halton Hills, the uniform bylaw will stand in place, so there won't be any question of where should I wear a mask or where shouldn't I wear a mask. And I think that just helps.
Councillor Cluett, we're seeing you talk, but we missed the last little bit of what you had said.
Okay. I don't know how that muted me. I guess my wife must be in control of the microphone. Essentially, what I was saying is that we wanted to ensure that the bylaw is uniform through, if there is going to be a bylaw for mandatory masks, that it would be discussed, debated at Halton Region. So that way the bylaw would be uniform throughout all 4 municipalities. And in conjunction with that, something that I think that we should really strongly urge is an education program from our public health department with input from our medical officer of health to educate Milton residents about the wearing masks. I see far too often some Milton residents with disposable masks hanging from their rear view visor, and they put them on and take them off, and they leave them in the car until they have to go out again. And that's not the proper way of using a mask. If we're going to be using them, we have to be using them properly. Cloth masks must be washed after every use. And that's something that I think our public health department, our medical officer of health needs to, in conjunction, if we move forward with a mandatory mask bylaw, to have that strong education program to go along with it. If we're going to be wearing masks to protect each other, we better be doing it properly. So I urge members of council to support the resolution, and as well to request again to the province of Ontario, if they so choose, to reconsider its stance and enact legislation to making masks and face coverings mandatory across the province of Ontario or in major urban cities, but to urge them to reconsider that decision. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Councillor Hamid, seconder.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Really quickly, one other point to remember is that because public health is regional, we get to ask questions for a chief medical officer. Public health staff is often present in council meetings, and so one of the benefits of discussing this at the region of Halton instead of town of Milton is that you heard from 2 different delegates from 2 different point of views, and I have some questions in response to that. And I'd like to ask those questions to our chief medical officer. And I'm sure that other councillors as well have questions that they want to clarify, because I don't believe any of us councillors are doctors. So I think we should leave the technical decisions to technical staff and hear from a chief medical officer. And that's part of the reason why I support this motion. So I'll just keep it short because I see a lot of speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hamid. And I do have a speakers list, and Councillor Di Lorenzo, Councillor Ali, and Councillor Best, and Councillor Malbouf in that order. Councillor Di Lorenzo, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also wanted to echo your remarks earlier about Oakville's motion yesterday. Actually, based on Oakville's, we withdrew our earlier motion to have the local bylaw come in effect because we saw that the region is looking to have one on the 15th. And we changed the amendment to make it similar to Oakville's. So the town of Milton would only have to act if the region did not act on the bylaw. So the amendment is more to bring us in line with the region and ensure if something happens that Milton is not the only municipality in Halton region without a bylaw in place. Because if the region did not choose to act, it's my understanding that Halton Hills, Burlington, Oakville, the other municipalities in Halton would either have something in place either before or the day after Halton region meets. So I'm wholeheartedly in agreement with what Councillor Cluett and Hamid said. I believe this should be at Halton region. We should have uniformity across the 4 municipalities. And I also wanted to echo what one of the delegates said about, please, on the education, we have to realize there are exemptions, and we need to educate the public to make sure they aren't shaming individuals who are out in public not wearing masks for a medical reason. And I think that's something that we also need to work on from an education perspective, and it should be mentioned here as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Di Lorenzo. And again, you still have the floor. I am looking at the amendment there that you had suggested and seconded by Councillor Tesser Dirksen, but I'm going to work on an assumption for a moment that the resolution moved by Councillor Cluett and seconded by Councillor Hamid will pass. So the amendment, Madam Clerk, I think, and this is where I look to your area of expertise, may be redundant, but I'm looking for little professional guidance on this one here. So, or Councillor Di Lorenzo, your thoughts on that?
So
I
I
just
worked,
want to duplicate it.
so I worked with the clerk. We removed all the portions that are redundant. So the only portion that amendment is to add the same clause that Oakville and other municipalities have. So it's not a redundant portion. It's there if Halton Region does not act on the 15th.
Okay.
The way the motion's currently crafted, Milton would be the only municipality in Halton Region without a bylaw. So that amendment is to bring us in line with the other municipalities, and it would only require Milton to meet if Halton Region did not pass. It brings this motion, I believe, in line to what Oakville passes.
Okay, I just want to be clear on that. I wasn't sure.
And-
Councillor Tesser-Dirksen, you being the seconder of that, with that understanding, and I don't want to get away from my speakers list here, but I think we want to be very clear and a clear understanding of what's happening. Because then if that's the case, I'll have to deal with the amendment first and then the main motion as amended. So Councillor Tesser-Dirksen.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, Councillor Di Lorenzo is correct. That's my understanding as well. Basically, we recognize that the region is the appropriate level of government to be dealing with this because they do have the benefit of the medical officer of health at their disposal for asking and having their questions answered. That being said, the concern is that if it is not accepted or passed or at the regional level, we want to have something ready to go. Residents are reaching out concerned about burning time, basically. So this is kind of a compromise that Councillor Di Lorenzo came up with and I seconded, so that if the appropriate level of government, being the region, doesn't act, we have something to fall back upon at the town of Milton, so that we're not the only municipality within the region that hasn't actually passed something. I have full confidence that the region will weigh in appropriately on the vote. I think lots of my regional counterparts have had contact from a large number of residents, as we have at the local level. So fully recognizing and deferring to the region in that context, but further recognizing that if it doesn't work out that way, we have something of our own to fall back upon.
Okay, and I think that's excellent, just as long as all of us is clear as what we're doing. So I am going to read the amendment here, because then members of council, this is what we will be talking about, is the amendment in the main motion as hopefully amended. So moved by Councillor Di Lorenzo and second by Councillor Tesser-Dirksen, and be it resolved that the motion be amended by adding the following clause: and the staff prepare a bylaw to enact a mandatory non-medical face mask or cover wearing requirement for the town of Milton, and that the bylaw be brought forward to town council at a special council meeting to be held on July 16th, 2020 at 7 p.m. and that this meeting be canceled should the region of Halton pass a similar bylaw. And that's pretty clear. So that, members of council, I want to deal with the amendment to start with. Is there any questions with the amendment? Being Councillor Chandler, go ahead.
Your worship, I think it's redundant. I won't be supporting it. I think it's pretty clear the region's going to make a decision. That's pretty obvious. The region already made one decision last week, and now it's in the process of considering another. And I don't see the value, quite frankly. It's not within our purview to be passing public health orders. We don't have the authority. That's why this has to be dealt with by the region, and it's why it will be. And so I won't be supporting this amendment.
Okay, I apologize for going out of order there a bit, but I wasn't dealing with the amendment to start with the main speakers list here. So now we're just dealing with the amendment. So Councillor Di Lorenzo and Councillor Ali, I had you on the main speakers list. Councillor Di Lorenzo, any further?
Just to say that the amendment brings us in line actually with other municipalities, with what Oakville, Burlington and Halton Hills have done, is they've all safeguarded themselves. They've all recognized that the Halton region takes precedence, but they put a safeguard that they will either have something in place before or after if the region doesn't act. Of the three municipalities that have already met, I like Oakville's approach better. And this amendment brings us in line with what they did. They're only going forward if the region doesn't act. And this is a safeguard that each other municipality has placed, recognizing that the region takes precedence. But if something doesn't occur, and if this amendment is not in place, Milton would be the only municipality in Halton region without the bylaw.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to take an opportunity to thank you and my regional colleagues for their leadership on this. This issue of masks has been discussed for the last 3 weeks. I've been getting emails and texts and calls from residents from my ward all over Milton, actually, who wanted us to enforce it at a local level. And for the past 3 weeks, I've been telling them that this is a regional purview. It should come from the medical doctor. And I appreciated the direction, Your Worship, you took on how we were strongly encouraging people to wear masks, but we were not mandating it. But currently the situation is that all around us, masks have been mandated, and we want to be a region that is cohesive and works together. And so it's important we do this as a whole and not divide the community. I feel like this rhetoric and narrative of masks, no mask, or encouraging it is just dividing the community. Now, during the pandemic, more than ever, we need to be united. So I want to thank you and my regional councillors for their leadership on it. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
I thank you very much. Councillor Best.
Nothing on the amendment. I'll be speaking to the main motion.
Thank you. Councillor Melboof.
I'll not be supporting the amendment for the reasons that Councillor Chalonar mentioned. It's redundant. It is a medical and health issues fall under the jurisdiction of the region. We'll be dealing with it next week. If for some reason it doesn't go Councillor De Lorenzo's way, he could always bring forward a motion and request a special council meeting. So I don't think we should be putting through this amendment. Let's leave it at the region where the jurisdiction falls under. So I don't know if I can comment on the main amendment and save a bit of time. Just
go ahead, Councillor Melboof.
Yeah, I agree with your opening comments, Mr. Mayor. Everything you stated, I support, and that's why I'll be supporting the motion as presented. The only thing that I would ask the mover and the seconder to maybe reconsider is that last line to where we request that the province bring forward a province-wide legislation. I don't think one ball plays for everybody. There are certain regions of the province that have not been affected, and there are other regions that are severely affected. So to ask that everybody fall under the same umbrella, I don't think is fair. So, I mean, I don't have an issue with it being there, but I would ask maybe the mover and the seconder to consider just removing that line. But I support the motion as a whole.
Okay, thank you very much. I do not have any further speakers, but
excuse me, Your Worship, I just wanted to
Councillor Melboof's thoughts.
Yeah, to Councillor Melboof's thoughts. I'm okay with it being in or out, whether or not, because I know it's simply just making a statement, and recognizing what's happening all over the province. These decisions are being made at hopefully the right levels of government, whatever level is responsible for public health. So in response to him, and either way with Councillor Hamid, I'd be okay if that would be removed.
Councillor Hamid being the seconder.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. If Councillor Cluett is indifferent, then I would rather take it out, because I do think that a regional approach is better than a province-wide approach, personally. So I would prefer to take it out.
Okay, can I assume for a moment then that majority council is in favor of taking that last paragraph out? I'm not seeing any hands go up opposing it, so that last paragraph is out. Okay, I do not have any further speakers now. I'm dealing with the amendment now, and I've heard the discussion and the debate. I'm not going to read it out again. Madam Clerk, I'm going to be looking for those opposing the amendment as well as those in favor. So if you could monitor with me, and again, I want to see my colleagues' hands go up like this. so as the clerk and I can see them. And I'm not calling for a recorded vote, but just we want to be very clear whether it passed or not. And I'm talking now strictly the amendment. So, but first of all, those in favor of the amendment, let's see your hands, please, for the amendment. Madam Clerk, if you're looking there, you can maybe get the numbers. Those opposed? Madam Clerk? Four on either side, so the amendment loses then.
Sorry, I had a question. Are councillors allowed to ask for a recorded vote?
Yes, oh, definitely, for sure.
I did send a request earlier to ask
Oh,
for.
I'm sorry, then I wasn't aware of that. So then the recorded vote has been called. Madam Clerk, on a virtual meeting, I think you have to call each name out, right? So the clerk is going to call each one of our names out with regards to in favor or opposed to the amendment. Okay, Madam Clerk, over to you.
Thank you. If I could just get members of council to indicate yay or nay as I call your name. Councillor Cluett.
Nay.
Councillor Ali.
Nay.
Councillor Best.
Yay.
Sorry, could I just get you to repeat again, Councillor Best?
Yes.
Okay. Councillor Challenor.
Nay.
Councillor Di Lorenzo.
Yes.
Councillor Malbuff.
Nay.
Councillor Tesser Dirksen.
Yay with a Y.
Thank you. Councillor Hamid.
Yes.
And Mayor Krantz. So I have 5 nays and 4 yays.
That was exactly what it was.
Yes, correct.
Okay, very good. Now the amendment.
Excuse me, the mayor's microphone's not on. I don't think anybody could hear what was said.
Okay, away we go. And again, the amendment loses. Now we're down to the main motion with no amendments. At least in my opinion, I think it captures the same. And I think I said that to start with. It may be redundant, but it was just maybe a safety net, the amendment. But I think the same results be there. And I'm predicting that it will pass at the regional level. I don't know whether it'll be unanimous or not, but I'm predicting it'll be by a large majority for sure. So again, members of council, you've heard the main motion read out earlier on. Is there any further questions? And I think Councillor Best, you indicated you had a comment before, so.
Yes, Your Worship, and thanks for your comments to begin with. I just had an AMO meeting this afternoon where we had the same question asked the Minister of Health, and they're reviewing the policy, and basically they prefer a regional approach. And so I agree with the main motion. Just for everyone's information, the mayor indicated earlier regarding the other 3 municipalities, Burlington this afternoon in committee unanimously approved their masking motion. I can understand the concerns of some residents and the delegations today, but some councillors may remember about 20 years ago, we had a similar debate about smoking indoors. And we saw how that's changed public perception. And basically the health department, I can understand the reluctance beginning, but now we have the medical officer health for the Halton, supporting these bylaws. So we're turning the channel, and now 80% of the region has unanimously adopted this. One of the concerns I have that anyone that's been following Halton.ca is that Milton has the most active cases, 23 out of 48. We have almost the majority in the region. So we really have to clamp down. And one of the concerns I'm receiving with people is grocery stores. We're still seeing a lot of people and staff not wearing masks. It's something that we either have to go all in and stop this, because as one person pointed out, we were next to the regions, in Toronto and Peel that had some of the highest rates, and also next to the country that has the highest rates in the world. So we have to take action. I know the numbers are low right now, but we could see there could be a second wave coming this fall. So let's be ready for it and take appropriate precautions.
Thank you very much, Councillor Chandler.
Thanks, Your Worship. I have a couple questions for you. I guess I'd kind of like to understand how the decision came about last week at the region and what role the medical officer of health played in that decision and the announcement that was made last week. I'm assuming that the mayors and the chair and staff sought the advice of the medical officer of health, and on that basis issued the decision that it did.
Yeah, certainly. I've said all along that I relied on the medical officer of health's advice, and she was advising against mandatory, but certainly supported it if it was council's wish. So it's probably, at least in my opinion, Councillor Chandler, more of a political decision than it is a medical officer of health's decision. And in those discussions as well, I think making something mandatory and making it enforceable is two different questions as well. And that's a whole other story. Chief Tanner was definitely a part of that debate. And he made it very clear it would almost be next to impossible for police to enforce a mandatory mask or cover wearing, as well as our bylaw enforcement at the local levels. It's being suggested it would almost be impossible. So it was like a double-edged sword. You know, if medical officer of health had to come out recommending mandatory, I think it might have had a bit more teeth. So I don't know if that helped you or not.
Sorry, Councillor Challoner, you'll just have to unmute again.
Your Worship, what I'm concerned about is, you know, what changed in 48 hours such that the city of Burlington's mayor and the town of Halton Hills mayor would essentially change their perspectives on a decision that they were a part of, because what it has had the effect of doing is undermining the authority of the chief medical officer of health of Halton. And it quite frankly has compromised the town of Oakville and the town of Milton, because we were supposedly a part of a unanimous decision. And, you know, I think whenever politics gets involved and gets ahead of science and health, that's not a good thing. So hopefully when this goes back to the region, this will get resolved. I support the motion, Your Worship. I want to thank Councillor Cluett and Councillor Hamid for bringing it forward. My only concern is, you know, where the mandatory aspect of this goes. You know, I can see it, you know, within municipal facilities and open spaces, as the City of Toronto has done. Beyond that, you know, we best be careful. I think exactly of the situation we're in today with restaurants, where we've taken measures in the last 2 weeks to help them get back into business. And what could the potential impact of this be on their businesses? I realize that a number of their patrons are outside, but they also have other services that are inside. And other businesses as well that are just trying to get back into business that are, you know, interior based. And what is the impact on them in terms of cost and ability to perform? So the region has a tough decision to make. And I hope that they take into consideration that we're trying to get this economy restarted. We didn't get here because of masks. We got here because of physical distancing, frequent hand washing, and those that were ill remained isolated. And that's what is going to take us into the next phase. So I wish everybody here who is a member of Regional Council Godspeed in your decision. And I want to thank both councillors again for bringing this forward. And I support it, but I look forward to the final decision.
Councillor Chandler, thank you very much for that. And again, I know some of those questions were asked of me, and I believe hopefully I've answered them, but I think your observations is bang right on with regards to some of the politics that evolved in it. And I guess you'd have to get into those other individuals' minds as to what changed in the interim. But I think it'd be safe to say that Oakville and the town of Milton was always on the same page, and maybe Halton Hills and Burlington was on a different page for whatever reason. So with that, I thank you very much. And I do have a speakers list: Councillor Cluett, Councillor Di Lorenzo, Councillor Hamid, and Councillor Ali, in that order.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thanks to everybody for their comments. Councillor Shalnor, you brought up some very strong and very valid opinions, and those are the again the reason for this meeting, as well as is to garner some opinions from our local colleagues as well, and I will be taking those comments that you made, as well as others that have been around this table, to the in contemplation with the as we vote at the regional level as well. Speaking of that, and it was on July 8th, our medical officer of health, Dr. McGanny, had released a statement as she strongly continues to recommend the use of face coverings when physical distancing can be a challenge. She's also supportive of approaches and measures to aim at the increase of use of face coverings as an additional layer of protection in their response to COVID. Should a municipality choose to implement a bylaw for this purpose, I would support this. And that was as of July the 8th. So that's trying to make it as clear as possible. I tread very carefully, because I don't want the perception to be that a level of government, whatever level, municipal or an upper tier at the regional level of government, influencing a medical officer of health's decision. Because that's the politicization of somebody who we require and want to have their independent views on. So the medical officer of health will be there at the council meeting on the 15th to answer questions and queries. So I'm assuming that that meeting will probably go a little bit longer than this one will, but I do take into consideration all the comments that have been made here today, and we'll bring that back as we contemplate that decision on the 15th. So thank you very much, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Di Lorenzo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Three things. One is I wanted to ask for for recorded vote. It's my hope and belief it's going to be an unanimous vote. So I just wanted the recorded vote to show that on council.
That will happen.
Two is a question, I guess, for maybe staff. So I understand that the regional meet on the 15th. And I understand that it's looking very likely that the Halton region will pass a mandatory bylaw. But I guess if Halton region does not on the 15th, Milton would be the last man standing. So this question from staff is, how quickly could a councillor petition and ask for a special meeting of council as soon as possible if something did occur on the 15th and Milton was the only municipality without a bylaw because of something happening on the 15th?
Okay, Councillor Di Lorenzo, let me deal with that. And again, I know I have the prerogative of calling a special council meeting along with the clerk, so that would happen very quickly. And again, I'm well aware there has to be a 48-hour circulation, such as this add-on, this addendum to this meeting here today. So I can assure you that will happen. Another way it can happen is the majority of council thought it wise to call a special meeting, they could as well. But I don't think in this case that would be necessary. So if that was to happen, you can rest assured that I'd be calling it in a hurry. But one of the things I think, Councillor Di Lorenzo, I think your assumption is probably like mine. I think it'll carry at the regional level by a large majority. I think I mentioned that earlier on, but there's always that possibility that it wouldn't. I've not spoke to any of my regional colleagues, but there's 5 of us down there, and I'm only assuming that the 5 of us will go down there supporting it. And that's only assumption on my part. So if that helps your comfort level a little bit, so be it. So Councillor Di Lorenzo, you had the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I guess the last thing is, when you go to the region, the communication is going to be important, because I've already had some businesses ask sort of if the region puts this in place, what type of turnaround can they have for putting up signs and getting ready. And I know some businesses already have signs ready, but just, I guess the communication is going to be important. So businesses are able to act in a timely basis and understand the timeline for when the bylaw would come into effect. So I know that will be discussed at the regional level. I just wanted to make sure that type of
Yeah,
communication.
Councillor Di Lorenzo, and again, you still have the floor, and I'm going to jump over to Councillor Hamid, who sits on that particular committee, and I'm not sure whether it's been discussed at that level or not, but Councillor Hamid, it's a good question and very important one as well.
Yeah, I know. Unfortunately, Mr. Mayor, nothing's been discussed in that committee because of COVID-19. Things have really cut down. But once it's my turn, I do want to touch back on some of those issues.
Okay, we'll get to you in a few minutes. Councillor Di Lorenzo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Hamid, it is your turn. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In addition to what Councillor Challoner said, I do want to hear, I mean, one of the things I want to do, if with your permission, is I want to hear concerns of our town councillors so regional councillors can raise them at the region. Because as Councillor Challoner mentioned, I'm actually concerned about the enforceability of it as well, as much as I support it, especially when it comes to private businesses. I mean, how does it work if someone at Walmart is not wearing a mask? What do we do about it? So I do want to understand that more. And I want to understand better what happens in public areas, because masks are not particularly as useful in public areas, in outside areas, especially if someone's cycling or running or jogging. I mean, that's where they probably should be wearing a mask. So I want to understand these issues, and that's part of the reason why I did not want us to pass this motion. I wanted it to be discussed with the region because I need our chief medical officer and our doctor to answer the question. Part of the reason why I ended up voting for the amendment is because should the region reject it and should the region turn it down, which I don't think is going to happen, then I do think the town of Milton should have the opportunity to look at it to decide what we want to do about it. And I think we should at least move ahead with putting masks mandatory on municipal buildings, regardless of what the region does, because we have control over municipal buildings. But I'm going to be talking about the region and asking a lot of questions, and I'm curious to know if there are any questions that town councillors would like us to ask, because I want to make sure that we don't miss anything, because it's an important topic, especially when you start forcing people to do something, as you heard from one of the delegates. And I say somebody who in general believes that masks might be are probably helpful, but you did hear that we're going to be forcing people to put something on their faces. So if we go down that path, we have to be absolutely sure that we do it for right reasons and we do it the right way. And so I'd be curious to know what all the questions are so we can make sure that we raise those questions. Thank you.
Councillor Hamid, you were probably listening to what I said earlier on there. Some of the local councillors at the 4 municipalities were not part of some of this originally, and that wasn't fair. And I'm one of the first ones to acknowledge that. And thank you for that question. And again, Councillor Ali is next on my speaking list here, but I think in fairness to all of them, Councillor Ali, Councillor Tesser-Dirksen, Councillor Melboof, and Councillor Challoner, you may or may not wish to respond to Councillor Hamid's question of the local councillor. So Councillor Lee, I had you on the list to start with.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I fully concur with what Councillor Hamid has to say. I mean, it's important to have the local voice added to the regional voice to make a strong impact. And for that reason, I would like my regional counterparts to consider the questions and concerns special needs groups have with regarding to donning masks. People with disabilities, especially the deaf community, you know, for them, the visual verbal movement of the mouth is very important in understanding what the other person is saying. And at the regional level, I feel like if there's something that could be done, some kind of special permit given out or something to such people who have medical reasons to not don a mask, so that they could use that or they could display it, so people automatically stay away from asking them, you know, intrusive kind of embarrassing questions. So some of the things to look at, I hope my regional counterparts are noting down these points that I have. We've all received a lot of emails, and one of the things that I have promised these people is that I'm going to you know, raise their concerns during council meeting. Most of their emails that I have received have been from people who do not support the wearing of masks for various reasons. Many have medical reasons, some have asthma, some belong to the deaf community, and these are valid reasons. These are not just, you know, just reasons they made up. So I want our regional council to consider these concerns when they go and speak on behalf of Milton, to include these voices in their advocacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chandler. On the question of Councillor Hamid's, the local councillors.
The medical question is very important, Z, and I thank you for asking us our thoughts on it. But the other thought too is, and the medical officer of health I think can answer the question is what do they mean by public spaces versus private spaces, indoor versus outdoor, and what is effective? Because I think that if we're not careful, we're going to overburden the business community, which today is already overburdened financially. And what is the risk? And she would know that. And so I would just advise that, be thinking about that community, because they're already feeling a lot of pain and we don't need to add to it. Those would be my two things.
I thank you, Councillor Tesser-Dirksen. Have you anything to add to the question of Councillor Hamid?
I think above all else, it's important that residents and businesses have certainty and clarity on what's expected of them. There's already going to be an issue with enforcement, as Chief Tanner has said. So it's going to be more difficult if people don't know what they're supposed to be doing. So really, that's my overarching concern. It's going to be a discussion, I'm sure, that's going to be robust and lengthy at the regional meeting. So if I have any other thoughts, I'll definitely touch base with my regional counterparts about it. But it has to be clear. And I don't think it's a bad thing to look at what other municipalities have drafted to get ideas. But at the same time, it's got to be, of particular interest to, well, I'm at the local level, so I'm interested in Milton, right? So have to make sure that we don't sacrifice what's important to each municipality for the sake of having consistency, which we also need. I don't envy the position that my colleagues are in, but I wish them the best of luck. And if I have any other comments, I'll be sure to reach out.
And I thank you very much for that. Councillor Di Lorenzo.
Just echoing on the communication part, both the businesses and also any communication the region does to try to safeguard residents who do have valid medical reasons from not being bullied or harassed while they're in public. I know some people who support the mandatory masks but can't wear them, and they're actually afraid what's going to happen after the mandatory mask goes into effect, because they have medical reason that they can't wear it, and they're afraid what's going to happen when they go outside. How are people going to treat them, not realizing they have a medical exemption? So I'm hoping that the region can communicate that portion in any press release to make sure that people try to act in a respectful way to fellow residents.
Thank you. Councillor Hamid, back over to you. So hopefully that was helpful.
It was, Mr. Mayor. I've taken notes, and if those questions are not asked by other councillors, then I'll make sure that Councillor Cluitt, myself, Councillor Malbuff, Councillor Best, or you, Mr. Mayor, one of us definitely will ask those questions.
Thank you very much. I do not have any further speakers, and I know Councillor Di Lorenzo has asked or called for a recorded vote. Is there any further discussion on this resolution before we have the vote? And again, Madam Clerk, over to you for a recorded vote.
Thank you. So learning from our last recorded vote, if I could get members to indicate either support or opposed, that would be appreciated. So I'll start with Councillor Cluitt.
Support.
Councillor Ali.
Support.
Councillor Best.
Support.
Councillor Challenor.
Support.
Councillor Di Lorenzo.
Support.
Councillor Malbuff.
Support.
Councillor Tesser-Dirksen.
Support.
Councillor Hamid.
Support.
Mayor Krantz. Support. You could repeat that again.
Support.
And that's unanimous.
It is unanimous. Thank you very much, members of council, for that. Okay, thank you very much. That was a worthwhile discussion. Now we're going to move to the staff report ES 008-20, and this deals with the Town of Milton recovery program strategy and framework. And I know the CEO and I have chatted a fair bit about this in the past few days there, and I know that Doug Sapano is going to be giving us an overview on this. But before I call on Doug, Andrew, is there anything that you wish to add at this early point?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just quickly, I guess the one thing I would say is thank you to Doug and the members of town staff that have worked on this document and the protocols. And I would note, we started working on this recovery document the moment we went into shutdown. And so as we went into shutdown, we started talking about what does the other side of this look like? This has received a lot of thought. There's been lots of ups and downs because it is a bit of a moving target. And so what I would say is, please know that Doug has prepared for us a document that's had lots of input, has been flexible as we've prepared it, and is prepared to continue to be flexible in light of new resolutions that could be passed at the regional level, changes that could happen along the way. And so what we have is a well put together, flexible document that's prepared to, you know, I hate the words, but be a living, breathing document. So forgive me for those words, but that's exactly what we have.
Mr. CEO, thank you very much for that. And Doug, just before I turn it over to you, and I expressed my thoughts with regards to the recommendation to start with, and it might lead one to believe that it was all about transit. I can assure you that this document is a lot more about transit, and Doug is going to get into some of the other details there as well. So with that, Doug, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, Council. Thanks for having me. Dina, if we have the presentation, I thought what we would start off with is be best to go through a little bit of an overview of what the recovery program strategy and framework look like. It can be a little bit of a detailed and in-depth type of a document here, just to help speed things along. Thought we'd do a little bit of an overview of where we're at on the highlights. And if we could bring that up, and we'll go from there. And then if there's any questions as it relates to the detailed program strategy and framework that's Appendix 1 on the document, I'd be happy to do that at any point. So if we just flip over to next page, please. So basically, we're just going to go through a summary of what the expected outcomes are, of what we did through this planning process and coming up with this document. We're going to touch on a little bit about what that framework looks like. We did use a tool of risk assessments to inform this process, and that's what drove a lot of the change of what we had going through this, and what types of change we anticipate to happen as we continue to open in various stages. We'll touch on a little bit about what's going to be happening at Town Hall, as well as in the community services facilities and activities in community services. We'll touch a little bit on the fire department as well as transit. There is another appendix here, Appendix 2, dealing more in depth with transit. And I know my colleague Tony is here as well to assist with discussion of that. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the expected outcomes. So what we wanted to do was create a process to ensure that all of the activities and services were coordinated in a consistent approach across the organization. So that includes everything from our civic facilities, our recreation facilities, the operations department, fire department, and so on. So as you can imagine, there's a number of different areas that we need to consider, and wanted to make sure that it was dealt with in the same manner across the board. We know that we need to have adapted workspaces to create a safe work environment for staff, for those that are already continuing to work on site throughout the pandemic, as well as those that will be returning to work in the near future. And again, that also takes into a lot of account of the multiple sites and multiple work configurations across the board. Part of the identification of going through the risk assessment process is reducing exposure of our community employees to COVID-19. And we'll be accomplishing that through a variety of protocols and processes. We also wanted to balance services with financial considerations, and as well as maintain business continuity to the greatest extent possible. And finally, and this is not least by any means, was the implementation of a scalable recovery plan that contemplates services and work programs being increased or decreased to adapt to the changing environment. And again, as Andrew mentioned originally a few minutes ago, that these plans are flexible and things do continue to change somewhat on a daily basis, if not hourly at some points. And the plans are completely built as flexible so that we can adapt quickly to whatever decisions are made moving forward. The next slide, please. So the recovery framework will follow provincial direction in stages, and you'll see how we've sort of got that mapped out, as well as regional health department directives. The framework was developed by 2 staff teams to address the corporation and community under the direction of the strategic management team. The corporate recovery team is represented by all departments to provide that consistent approach in the development of the appropriate policies and protocols. And the community services team was formed to address the unique challenges delivering programs to the community and operating public facilities. There is an internal companion document that complements this framework, and that will serve as the basis for all departments and concerning human resource policy, health and safety, and standard operating procedures. So that will be a document that will be used within the organization to drive our work processes moving forward as well. Next stage. Thank you. So I'm sure you've all seen the recovery stages as mapped out by the province as being stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. And what we've done is we've mapped all of our work into those categories as being stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and being able to adapt in this changing environment. One thing that we'd sort of like to point out and make sure that we described very well here is that one of the things that we knew right out the get-go was that different areas, whether that be processes, business processes, or activities, or facilities, could potentially be in different stages at different times, depending on provincial orders, health orders, or in the event of different exposures. So it is very fluid, and different areas, like I said, different areas could be in different stages at different times, and somebody could end up getting into stage 3 and then have to fall back to stage 1, depending on circumstances. So we've built that type of flexibility into the plan and being able to adapt as we need to moving forward. Next slide, please. Okay, so part of the risk assessments, well, I guess the result of the risk assessments leads to physical administrative changes. So as I'm sure all of you have seen, if those have been out shopping and whatnot recently, you'll continue to see those types of things that you're becoming more familiar with, such as screening at entrances, hand wash stations, barriers at service counters, floor markings, additional signage. We are introducing enhanced cleaning at all locations, and we're also removing high touch items such as furniture and common space amenities and whatnot. And business processes have also been changed and are continuing to be adjusted as part of the administrative protocols to deal with this. Next slide, please. So we'll start with talking a little bit about Town Hall. So maintaining business continuity throughout the pandemic resulted in the majority of services to be continued to be offered in a virtual environment. So that's one of the things I think that everybody should, for council's awareness, as we've continued to mention on several occasions, was business continuity continuing throughout this emergency. We have had a few services that have been interrupted, mostly in community services, obviously. But at Town Hall, we have been reintroducing other services such as marriage licenses recently, being done by appointment only, and that's been done in a very, I would say, slow, controlled, deliberate manner, and has been working out very well. Part of the risk assessments that we're doing is also giving us the indication of what we need to do at Town Hall to be able to maintain sort of 2-meter distancing sort of throughout and make sure that Town Hall will be a safe environment. And those types of, I would say, standards and measures are also being applied at all sites and locations. So the Civic Operations Center, different fire stations, and our recreation facilities as well. So focusing at Town Hall, one of the things that we have been able to do through some spatial analysis is we're figuring that we're probably going to need to reduce the Town Hall population by approximately about 50% at any one time, to be able to allow for 2-meter distancing at all times. Part of the work that is ongoing that's informing the companion document is developing the human resources policies and guidelines of how we're going to reintroduce staff back into the workforce. And we're going to be doing that sort of in a very, again, slow, controlled approach. It's most likely going to be phased and ultimately building out to that 50% target. The next slide, please. So for community services, obviously there has been several updates over the last few weeks, as you've seen, of different facilities in programs and our intentions on what we're going to open and when. We are going to continue down that road and continue to have dialogue with the community to determine their needs and help inform the strategy of what facilities we're going to open. So this week we did open Sherwood Community Center on Monday this week for the start of some ICE programming, again in a very slow and deliberate manner. And we are going to be introducing some aquatic programming next week with camps following the following week. And again, everything is just happening in a very slow, controlled manner, which seems to be working out very well for staff, getting used to the different protocols and administrative procedures to be able to make sure that that's done in a safe environment. And this process also allows the scalability that we can react to what the community needs. And if need be, if it's not there or we have issues, we can either scale up or scale down as needed. Next slide, please. So my friends over at the fire department have been very helpful throughout this process. I've had many discussions with them, and they've been a part of this programming and planning process as well. They've continued to provide essential services, emergency services throughout the pandemic, and they too are looking at the same type of work scheduling and workplace modifications, and we're doing this in close collaboration. The operations division is another group that has been out working and providing essential services throughout the pandemic, and their building is closed to public access. And again, that's another one that will continue to evolve over the course of the coming months. Next slide, please. So transit. So as part of the town's overall recovery, staff have developed a flexible blueprint to recover transit services to normal seasonal levels while making transit as safe as possible for customers and contracted operational employees. That plan was also developed as a rolling wave plan, allowing services to proceed, but continuously adapting as details and requirements emerge or become evident. So again, that's another plan, and the primary driver of everything that we're doing is to provide as much flexibility and scalability to adapt to a changing environment. And next slide, and I think that sort of wraps up that brief overview of Appendix 1. I know we have Appendix 2 attached as well, and that's for transit in particular that we can let Tony speak to if there's any questions, but I'm happy to answer any questions at this point.
Okay, for this portion of the presentation, Councillor Chandler.
Your worship, thank you. I actually am waiting for the transit discussion. That's where my questions are, but just want to say thanks, Doug, for a very good presentation.
Thank you.
Councillor Ali.
Thank you, your worship. Through you, I have a question for staff. I did not see the mention of the reopening of council chambers within stage 3, and I was wondering if that was on the plans.
Doug?
Through your worship, yes, that could be potentially on there. As things continue to evolve, I'm sure those discussions are going to take place over the next few months. Obviously, the plan is flexible, as I mentioned, as new information continues to become available, and we can continue to slot in wherever appropriate if that's council's wishes.
Thank you. Thank you, Doug. I would recommend staff to check out what Barrie is doing. They have plexiglass in between councillors and they're making it work that way. So just an idea.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tesser Dirksen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks to staff for that great report. Really quick question, and it might not even be worth asking because obviously the plan is very flexible, but in the event that there is, a flare up or the province passes down new orders, I recognize the plan is nimble. How nimble, like how quickly can you shut down Sherwood Community Center, for example? Like what type of communication streams are available to staff and to residents to know not to show up, for example?
Through your worship, thank you for the question. Yes, we have emergency protocols in place that deal with emergency situations on a regular basis, not just related to the pandemic. So in the event that there were to be any type of an emergency of whatever nature, we do have the ability to shut down extremely quickly. That would not be an issue whatsoever. Most likely that could be done with, I would suggest within an hour type of thing. We do have communication protocols in place and have the ability to contact our client group, our user groups, rental holders and permit holders and whatnot fairly quickly from other sites. So the idea to shut down or whatever would not be a concern for us.
Councillor Tesser-Dirksen, any further?
No, thank you. That's perfect.
Okay, Tony, you're on with your portion of the presentation. Welcome.
Your worship, if I may.
Yes, Christine, doesn't look like Tony, but welcome.
No, it's not Tony. Tony is on. The transit appendix was part of the corporate recovery plan. So there is no separate presentation on transit, but obviously Tony would be happy to take any questions specific to that area.
Okay, very good. Are there any questions by any member of council on the transit portion of it? Councillor Chandler.
Thanks, Your Worship. Yes, I have some questions related to towards the back of the document in terms of increasing the level of free pass to 12 from 5, and it talks about in the piece the costs associated with that. And I know that there were some additional costs because we've had questions from the public in the last year about free transit for kids who are older, sort of matching what they're doing, Your Worship, at the TTC. So what is the cost implication of increasing the level of free ride? Because that 5 to 12 age group was, I don't want to say significant, but material to us in terms of budget.
Tony, do you have any of those numbers?
Through Your Worship, yes. So the net annual cost to implement all the fare policy changes is $16,000 per annum. The implementation of the fare policy starting in September 1st is approximately $6,800. The impact and based on the research that we've done in terms of the age group that used Milton Transit and the age group that would consider using Milton Transit, if this free fare policy would go into play to allow free transit for 12 and under, similar to Toronto and Go Transit and Durham Region, was less than 1%. So we did not see a significant impact from a financial perspective. So and those numbers are included in the financial section.
Mr. Chandler.
The reason I asked the question is at one point I understood that 34% of the ridership was in that age group, and perhaps that's no longer correct. And I would just ask in future if we could sort of provide just a bit of a spreadsheet with this kind of a report that shows us, what the puts and takes are of this kind of work. I appreciate the amalgamated number of $16,000, but I also would have appreciated a greater breakout and a sense of what that means in 2020 in total. And I realize that in a separate document, Your Worship, that Glenn sent the other day, There is an update on transit, but it's more high level, not quite this specific as Tony has provided us, obviously. And so it would be helpful to me and perhaps others if when we're providing this kind of report to council, we could sort of provide a little bit more additional information on the financial side of it.
Just to comment through your worship, majority of our rides, the 34% that you're highlighting, Councillor, we made the assumption that a majority of those passengers are high school students that are beyond 12, and so that's why the impact is much less when you reduce from the 12 and under for free. So I think that's the significance of those financial implications.
Councillor Chandler, any further?
That's it, Your Worship. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Melbuff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Challen and I addressed the question I was going to raise, but to Tony, transit, because of this COVID issue, has taken a major hit as far as budget-wise, ridership, which means revenues. So does it make sense to be bringing forward policies and programs that will even further reduce any revenues once things pick up? That's my concern with what we're proposing here. There's going to be a major shortfall in revenues in transit this year. And I'm just wondering what the thinking is to bring forward policies that's even going to further reduce those revenues.
Through your worship, the strategy behind this is really leveraging the opportunity to see if we can be in more alignment with our peers and the GTHA. So I know a lot of the significance around the policies that we're recommending through this report will allow more further integration with our peers, such as, for example, the 2-hour universal transfer, as well as aligning some of our concessions. The balance here, and your point is well taken, and I believe staff have done a considerable effort to reduce and mitigate costs where possible during the pandemic, recognizing the fact that we have relaxed fares in this instance. But the strategy behind these policies is to recognize the fact that we're really trying to promote a more comfortable and inclusive environment similar to our peers, that actually will promote more ridership and more opportunities for loyalty on our system, as well as to really try to help engage some of those fare-paying passengers to use transit more often. So, for example, the 12 and under free, the idea here is to really invest in that group so that as they enter into high school, they are more likely to take public transit more often. And so revenues will come with that as well. So the idea is a strategic initiative to really try to move in transit into more a long-term, more sustainable system.
Okay, thanks for that response. And that's the same thing I've been hearing for 10 years, but and it's still costing us a fortune. I don't want to go down the route that Oakville and Burlington are. Their transit budgets are overwhelming, what their deficits are. And I see us, trying to follow their lead. To me, it doesn't make sense. But we'll see what happens. When it comes to budget time, we'll have a chance to look at it. But I don't agree with what's being proposed here.
Thank you, Councillor Melbuff. Councillor Cluett.
Thank you, Your Worship. I had some questions. Through Tony's answers, they've been clarified. I do want to talk about and show support for the 2-hour universal transfer. It's something that we've been hearing from a number of different communities. Our seniors community has been very strongly in favor of something like this, so they can hop on the bus, go for grocery shopping, and not have to require another fare to get back on if they shop within the 2 hours. So that's always something that's very good for our seniors. And again, as Tony had mentioned, having the 12 and under free A good portion, I live along a Milton Transit line, bus line number 3 and 4, filled with students on a day-to-day basis and throughout the day when school's not in session. Obviously not as much during COVID, but they're the ones that are going to be using the system. So it's going to be easier to integrate them into a good transit system so that we'll become future transit users than trying to sit there and hammer at someone, you know, my age in my 50s or Councillor Malbuff to try to get to him to get on the transit system. It's not going to happen, but it's going to be easier for our youth and our young people to get integrated in there. So I'm very supportive and very thankful for the report, and look forward to some of the results as we get out of this COVID-19 situation.
Thank you very much. I don't have any further questions with regards to Tony and his portion of the recovery program. Tony, do you have any further to add?
No, I don't, Your Worship. Thank you very much.
Okay, just before you run there, Tony, maybe Councillor Challoner, maybe you have another question of Tony?
Your Worship, I don't. I just have a comment before we vote.
Yeah, go ahead.
I will be supporting what Tony is proposing. There are some aspects of this that, in fact, do save money. Yes, there are some that that don't. But I think the bigger question, Your Worship, is the one that Rick has mentioned, and that is, you know, the 2021 budget, the discussion about transit within the realm of the master plan, and alternative ways to provide a service to the community that is an improvement. And I suspect Tony and others in the team are looking at that. And as we talked about last year, and it's sort of it is talked about in the master plan, the use of Uber and Lyft as an example. We need to improve the level of service to drive interest in the service, and that may be a way to do it efficiently and cost effectively. But I look forward to seeing how this rolls out.
Thank you very much. And again, Christine, I know that you're still with us, and Doug, I just wonder if either one of you two have any further to add to this report. Christine?
Nothing, Your Worship. Just my thanks to staff who put this together. I know it's taken a lot. Doug really has taken the lead on this, and I know that SMT really appreciates it. And Tony has done a significant amount of work with his transit colleagues at both CUDA and OPTA, and is advocating on a daily basis for funding for us at those meetings. So just super appreciative.
Thank you very much. Doug, any further?
No, thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much for that. And all I have left now is the resolution here, unless there's any further discussion on it. I have a motion moved by Councillor Ali and second by Councillor Cluett, and be it resolved that the Council approve the Town of Milton Recovery Program strategy and framework attached as Appendix 1. And that Council approve the Milton Transit COVID-19 Recovery Plan attached as Appendix 2, including the following updates to the transit fare policy. Number 1, introduction of a 2-hour universal transfer policy. Number 2, discontinuation of the day pass. Number 3, discontinuation of the Transcab premium fare. Number 4, realignment of child and youth concession categories and introduction of a no-fare child concession permitting those 12 years of age and younger to ride transit free. That the town user fee bylaw be amended to incorporate the transit fare policy changes with an effective date of September 1st, 2020. Members of Council, you've heard the resolution. Questions, Councillor Malbuff?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, Mr. Mayor, if we could split the resolution. I could support the, receiving the report on the recovery, but I can't support the transit issue.
Okay, Councillor Malbuff, maybe you could help me and maybe the clerk understand exactly what portion that you would like taken out and dealt with separately.
Yeah, I can support Appendix 1, but I
Okay.
can't support Appendix 2.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, let's then, Madam Clerk, I'm going to suggest we deal with Appendix 1 to start with. And And again, I'm going to work on an assumption unless I see a hand go up, and then I'll know you're opposed. But I will assume that if I don't see a hand go up, I'll assume that those are in favor of Appendix 1. I'm dealing now just with Appendix 1. Those opposed to Appendix 1? No one, so that's carried. Now, dealing with Appendix 2, questions? Those opposed to Appendix 2?
Opposed?
Opposed, yeah. Okay, it's been recorded that Councillor Malbouf is opposed to it, and going to assume that everyone else is in favor of it. So with that, that motion is carried. Okay, moving right along, as I had mentioned right at the outset, there was 3 items, and one was a mask issue, and one was the recovery program. All that we have left now, of course, is the Integrity Commissioner's annual report, and it's been suggested, and the clerk and I, and she in discussion with the Integrity Commissioners, and there are 2 of them here. What is being thought or maybe suggested that we have the open session now, because a closed session may take a little longer than what the commissioners might have, and maybe even what council might have. So personally, I have no problems with staying as long as it takes, but I know some of you, including the commissioners, have other time commitments. I'm aware of that. So with that, Jeffrey Abrams and Janice Atwood-Petowski, Nina, if you could be so kind to bring both of those individuals on, and then they can speak to whether they just want to make the open portion of their presentation and do the in-camera portion a little later on. So Nina, over to you, to our Integrity Commissioners.
So thank you, Mayor. I have promoted both of them. So Jeffrey and Janice, if we can just ask you to turn on your video and your sound. There we go.
Good. Wonderful. Thank you very much.
And again, Janice and Jeffrey, I suspect that you probably heard my intro onto it on timing. So I'll be guided by your 2 sentiments.
Sure, and I think I just want to clarify that the annual report, which we're very happy to provide just some high-level comments, it's before you. It's the closed portion is really a workshop on a little training that we would like to provide around the components of the Code of Conduct, Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, that kind of thing. So it's really education and training. It's not that there's some closed portion of the annual report coming to you. It's really the annual report speaks to what we've been doing for you over the last couple of years of our retainer, and the closed portion, if you want to push that off, that's all right by us. We really prefer to do it in person. We are, all stuck in this pandemic situation. So we're prepared to do it by Zoom, and we can, but we really like to engage. And it's all about providing the best, most informative, robust training and discussion around the ethical framework. And that, we think, happens much better in a face-to-face sort of a university seminar kind of discussion. And that's why we do it in closed, under the heading that the Municipal Act really invites, which is education and training. It's not intended to move forward the business of the municipality at all. It's really just about us trying to make sure that everybody fully understands what their what the components of their code is and what the municipal conflict of interest requires of them. So I'm going to speak first to the...
If I could, Janice, let me determine now. It's my understanding that if we're to go to the closed session, that it'd be roughly an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours there. And again, I'm going to assume that you 2 are okay for that.
We're prepared, certainly.
Okay, and I can only speak personally, so am I. But I have 8 other colleagues there as well, so I want to get a sample for them. Unless I see a hand go up or 2, that you'd like to move it off, but if not, we will proceed with the open session and then the closed session, keeping that in mind. So members of Councillor Tesser-Dirksen.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I can make myself available. I just may need to switch over to my mobile because I do have to be on the move a little bit. So if you see me go dark for a few minutes, that's where I am. I'm just switching over.
Okay, I'll be guided by majority thought. Councillor Melbuff?
Yeah, I support what Janice was saying. We're looking at an hour and a half to 2 hours in the closed session, added on to what's going to occur right now. So I don't know, it's going to make for a long meeting, and how much are we going to absorb? So if the Integrity Commissioner's office is not, believes it's better to postpone it to where we can have a general meeting with everybody together in a face-to-face, I would support that rather than this type of thing. So that's my position. I'll see what the rest of the council wants to do, but we'd be looking at 8:30, 9 o'clock by the time we're done.
Yeah, this is the feedback that I'm looking for, as a matter of fact. So Rick, thanks for that. Members of council, you heard Councillor Melbuff and you heard Councillor Tesser-Dirksen. What's your wish? Councillor Cluett?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and I concur with Councillor Melbuff's comments. And not to say that this, we've had a busy day, obviously, with these issues, and then we don't want to dismiss the importance of it. But I would think and I think they would agree, we would rather be sort of refreshed and prepared, because I knew we were going in camera. I didn't know it was going to be for an hour and a half following a council meeting. So if they would be agreeable to maybe looking through our schedules, I know pretty much we're free, not much going on other than regular meetings, but we can set something up where we'll be, I think, fresher in the day and be able to learn a little bit more, because it is important that she wants to, these issues are important to discuss.
Yeah, for sure. I'm getting some nods there from Jeffrey there and Janet. That may be the best way to go. So I'm going to assume that it's probably the wisest thing to do for the majority of us, and to the in-camera session be rescheduled again. I'm not going to suggest at some distant time, but when it's available to the integrity commissioners as well, with staff and council and spend, because the odd part is when this was set up, the mask issue was not on the agenda, so we would have been all right with that. So we apologize to the commissioners for that happening, but there was no other way that I could deal with it. So with that, what I'm going to suggest, Jeffrey and Janet, we proceed with your report openly, and we'll deal with the in-camera portion of it at a little later date. So thank you and welcome, Janice and Jeffrey. Who's going first?
Thank you very much. I will jump right in. This is our annual report, and we call it that, but it's actually more of a biannual report because it comes about at about the 2-year mark. We were appointed by you in July of 2018, so this is basically a 2-year report, although the actual detail of the report is up to the end of March. The events kind of overtook us, and we got the report to you, but we weren't able to really set this up for presentation. So the role of an integrity commissioner really is to provide sort of a broad group of supports to municipal council, and that is to advise, to provide training and education, coaching in response to requests for advice, etc., and when necessary to investigate complaints when they come in, and if they cannot be resolved without a recommendation report, then that's our duty to bring forward a recommendation report. So we'll talk a little about that in a couple of minutes. You'll see from the report that really the area of work of the Integrity Commissioner is to, it falls really into a couple of big categories under the Municipal Act and under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. So we, Jeff Abrams and myself, are Principals Integrity, and we are your Integrity Commissioner, and we really focus on accountability and the ethical framework and governance and try to provide that support to the best advantage of the municipality. At present, we have about 40 municipal clients across Ontario. That gives us a great opportunity to see sort of the fisheye view, if you will, of what's going on across the province. And we're also very involved with the Municipal Integrity Commissioners of Ontario Association, and have really continued that work behind the scenes to work with other integrity commissioners across Ontario to make sure we get some continuity and consistency in this really newly evolving field. So the area of work that we provide really falls into policy development and education, advice, and complaint investigation and resolution. So for policy development and education, you'll recall, provided education and training to council in November of 2018. We had a training session and provided some broad-based training on the ethical framework at that time. Recognizing that it's probably timely to repeat some of that, and also there are some learnings since that point in time, but that's the last time that we engaged with you for training. We've also worked behind the scenes with your staff on a draft code of conduct for local boards and a draft council staff relations policy. The second area that we provide is advice, and our advice is available to any member of council or any member of a local board. The advice is independent, it's confidential, and it's binding. In other words, if a member of council and a number of you have availed yourself of this opportunity, so if a member of council reaches out and asks for advice, then based on the facts that you provide us, we'll provide you the advice. And if you comply with that advice or adhere to that advice, then it is binding in the event of a complaint. It's binding on us. In other words, you are bulletproofed with that advice. The advice needs to be in writing, obviously, and the facts need to remain the same. So during the period of our retainer to date, and this is really to the date in the report, which is the end of March, we have basically had 3 requests for advice and have provided advice to members who requested that. We also, and this is really probably the most familiar to the public, we provide an investigation opportunity or mechanism for members of the public or members of council who have a concern about a member of council or a member of a local board. And so we respond to those inquiries or complaints as they come in. And we really go through a triage process. We review to determine whether the complaint is even within our jurisdiction, because, you know, often as not, the complaint is perhaps operational in nature, and we redirect complainants to the appropriate individual or department or back to the municipality. We also look to see that it's not a mere, you know, a trifling, as people say, frivolous or vexatious. And sometimes we add an extra layer to that. Sometimes a matter may be a breach, but it's really not something that's warranting an investigation. So it may be a small technical toe over the line type of transgression, but we look at those and determine whether it's really in the public interest to embark on an investigation. We always look to try to find a course correction and a resolution if it's possible. If there's something possible that can resolve a matter without need for a full investigation and a public report, that's always our goal. But sometimes that is not possible. Where it's not possible, we do, of course, have to then bring public report. And we would say probably in about 10 to 15% of cases of complaints, we end up bringing a public report. In the vast majority, we're able to find some resolution, a course correction, whereby the complainant is satisfied that the behavior ends or that the issue is resolved. So in terms of our retainer for the town of Milton, we have had 4 complaints over the course of our retainer, and each one of those has been resolved to the satisfaction of the parties through this informal mechanism and without the need for a recommendation report to council. So as I mentioned, we provide integrity commissioner services to a large number of municipalities across Ontario. And so we have sort of a bird's eye view to see what the various issues are. And we see there are a lot of similarities in issues across the province. So we just thought we would share some of those or a couple of those in this report. So certainly one of the areas that we see pop up time and time again is the failure of members of council to recognize that there are rules against disparagement. And this hasn't been necessarily an issue in Milton, but it's an issue that we observe around the province. So members of council, of course, are entitled to disagree and indeed expected to disagree and debate on all manner of issues, but that cannot devolve into disrespect, disparagement, or name calling. That behavior applies as well in social media, which is where often we see these issues crop up, where a member may get carried away in sharing views on Twitter, on Facebook, etc. So that's an area that we have seen, and we just always, remind members that decorum and sort of you need to manage your how you articulate views publicly. Another area that comes up frequently is the area of conflicts of interest and what is a conflict of interest and what is not a conflict of interest. So we see these come up all of the time with council members on councils across Ontario. So the issue of, for example, members of council being involved in a local service club and issues come before council and they have questions. Do they have a conflict? How do they deal with that? That type of thing. We see these come up all the time, and we always encourage members of council to reach out. That's one of the reasons we're here. The advantage of having an integrity commissioner retained by the municipality is that members of council don't have to dig into their own pocket to hire their own lawyer to get legal advice. They can reach out to the integrity commissioner, get some reliable advice that is going to be binding in the event there's an issue that arises down the road. So those are the kinds of issues we do see. Another area we see is where members of council, in their desire to respond to constituents, will sometimes actually take the reins in hand and try to fix the constituents' issues, or really step in and do what is effectively staff's job. And so that's a difficult thing to make sure that line is clear, so that staff are not, staff have their role and members of council have their role. And really, there is a very clear line that can't be crossed. And so that's an area that comes up from time to time. Of course, if members of council overstep that line, they need to recognize that there are risks to the organization, and it also places staff in a very difficult position when the member of council is stepping in basically to take the reins on a matter, as opposed to stepping back and passing the constituent along to the appropriate staff. That's really some of the work in the council staff relations policy. Just trying to see, one of the things we have observed, obviously, over the last couple of months is electronic meetings. And so We do always, when we have the opportunity, remind members of council and staff that, you know, electronic meetings are great and they really can work very effectively. And obviously we're part of an electronic meeting right now, so we know that. But there hasn't been a change to all the other rules. In other words, meetings are allowed to and authorized to occur electronically because electronic participation can count as quorum. But all the other rules continue to be in force under the Municipal Act in terms of the obligations of providing transparency to the public. So that's just I just note in passing because we're in an electronic meeting and obviously it's something that you're aware of. I'm not sure that there's much else that we wanted to say. We, in terms of the annual report, unless there's any particular questions, that's sort of the it in a nutshell.
I'll just add, Mr. Mayor and Council, that with the division of labor tonight, the annual report was Janice's responsibility, and I would have begun in closed session, so I lucked out with the timing. But I just want to emphasize a couple of things, and one is, from our perspective, it's working as it should be working. It's been a moderate level of activity. We've been engaged with staff certainly, and we'll soon with you on the ethical framework and in presenting for your consideration revisions to the code of conduct. And so that's a good news story. It's working as it should be, and it's moderate. The level of activity has been moderate. What we do, just to emphasize again, our role is to provide advice to you. It's because we're statutory officers, we do it under the Municipal Act provisions that require that our work be independent and that it be in most cases confidential. And so that's how we've been carrying out our responsibilities. We like to reach out periodically to speak to council just to make sure you understand that there is work underway and it's not just a paper assignment. And so that was the purpose of the discussion this evening. And as Janice said, we invite questions.
I thank you very much. I have Councillor Tesser Dirksen to start with. Councillor Tesser Dirksen.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to the presenters. Just a question in general about the role of a councillor if we are contacted by a resident who wants to get in touch with you or who has already made a complaint and wants to know where the status of it is because they haven't heard back or something like that. What's the appropriate role for a councillor there?
It's awkward to have I'll take it first. As I just mentioned, and particularly with respect to complaint investigations, there is a cloak of confidentiality around it. And so generally speaking, a councillor will not know. Certainly if you're not the respondent, you won't know. So our information is posted and people are able to contact us directly, and we will, if it's the complainant, there will be an exchange of information with them and us at some point in time. Just to flesh out the question, and as we indicated tonight, not every investigation, in fact, a minority of investigations result in public reports. And so when there is a complaint that's filed and it's resolved without the need for a public report, we provide extensive reasons to the complainant as to how we've come to our decision. So there is advice that's given back at the end of the day, if that's helpful.
Councillor Tesser Dirksen, anything further?
No, that's good. Actually, just one follow-up question. Generally, how long is the process from a complaint to well, I guess it depends how it's resolved or the process that needs to be taken. So
would you be satisfied with an answer that says it depends?
It depends. Thank you.
Are there any, I'm sorry, are there any other questions of the Integrity Commissioners? Okay, Jeff and Sharon, or Janice, I'm sorry. There doesn't appear to be any more questions there, and I thank you very much. I do, and if you could just hang there with me for a moment, I do have a resolution moved by Councillor Lee and second by Councillor Cluett. And be it resolved that the Integrity Commissioner's annual report be received. Are there any questions on that resolution? If not, I'm going to assume that it's carried unanimously unless I see a hand go up opposing it, which I'm not seeing a hand. So that is carried unanimously for our two integrity commissioners. And I'll sign that document in just a moment. But before we adjourn, Madam Clerk, if I could suggest you and staff, along with the commissioners, get a date in the hopefully not too distant future to have that in camera portion, that training process, which I think is important. I think Janice mentioned it's almost 2 years since we went through that. So I think it's important as well. So I thank you, Jeffrey, and I thank you, Janice, very much for the report. And
Thank you.
staff will be in touch to arrange it, and hopefully we won't sideline you again. So thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Now, Madam Clerk, to the best of my knowledge, that takes care of our agenda. The clerk mentions that the bylaws now have to be addressed. I have a resolution moved by Councillor Ali and second by Councillor Cluett. Be it resolved that bylaws numbers 055-2020 and 056-2020 be read, passed and numbered, and the mayor and the town clerk be authorized to sign the said bylaws, seal them with the seal of the corporation, that they be engrossed in the bylaw book. Any questions on reading of either of these bylaws? If not, I will assume that everyone is in favor unless I see a hand go up like that. So that is carried. Madam Clerk, I think that pretty well takes care of this special council meeting. Members of council, I believe that, Madam Clerk, the next council meeting is July 20th. So unless there's some other reason, we talked about that earlier on. So other than that, if we don't see you or we meet before, we'll see every member of council on July 20th. So with that being said, is there anything that any member of council wish to bring forward at this time that's important? If not, members of council, this council meeting is now adjourned. To staff, Nina, as you, the director, thank you very much. Good night.
Good night, everybody.